Started. My name is Zaina Karabatic. I'm one of the assistant directors within the International and Student Scholar Affairs. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Leah Zimmer to introduce herself and get us started.
Great. Good evening. My name is Leah Zimmer. I'm the director of the International Student and Scholar Affairs Office, and we are just super pleased to be welcoming you to campus. I know for many of you, it has been quite a journey, whether that was because of the experience at the consulate or the embassy, getting your visa. Maybe your travels were more adventurous than you would have liked to get here to the US, or maybe just moving into the apartment. The transition from getting from Chicago to South Bend was more than expected. So we're just so delighted you're here with us. I wanted to talk a little bit about International Student Scholar Affairs, just to give you a frame of who is hosting tonight. Our office is really about the work of serving our international student, scholar, and employee community. And you'll see here a version of our mission statement where we work within the welcome space and moments like these, dinners and lunches that we'll host over the next few weeks for new students so you can connect with other current students and each other on campus. We are committed to really excellent advising for our student scholars, employees, and departments on U.S. immigration regulations and your responsibilities as U.S. visa holders. We have responsibilities around reporting to the U.S. government and to ensuring that the university maintains compliance and that all of you maintain compliance as well with your visa status in the U.S. so that you can use your Notre Dame degree after graduation, so that you can thrive in your research and really focus on why you're at the university with your program. The other two things that we're really committed to in our office, one is promoting the culture and contributions of our international students. You'll find that there are a lot of opportunities on campus, and we look to find ways to connect and support those events and those experiences that are happening and fill in the gaps where there might be some. And then lastly, we look at how do we advocate for all of you to really effectively engage and integrate into the community and thrive in the transition to campus, and really ensure that you are feeling a part of the community, that you feel you are contributing to the community, and that you are receiving the gifts of this community in your academic life, in your social life, in the community building that you're doing, and the professional relationships that you're building. Again, a few other pieces of information about our office. One is that all immigration advising and reporting at the university happens within the ISSA office. And so any questions that you have during your tenure, whether you are a 2-year master's student or you have 5 or 6 years ahead of you as a PhD student, or you are a 1 or 3-year law student, all of that immigration advising, all of the reporting responsibilities goes through our office. The second thing that's really important to know is that there are more than 2,000 international community members, meaning individuals like you who have a U.S. visa to be at the university, to work, to do research, to study, and to move forward in your academic career. There are 7 of us that serve that 2,000 plus community members. So know that we work really hard to be responsive and engaging and give every single one of those 2,000 people the really high quality experience they deserve from our office. And if you ever have concerns about that, you can always reach out to me or to Zaina to check in on that. But we are so thrilled. We're all very passionate about ensuring that you can do what you came to Notre Dame to do. We also do community engagement and advocacy. I mentioned from the previous slide, that's a smaller portion of our office's work. And then pieces of navigating life in the US. So very practical things like understanding transportation options, understanding your social security number and how to get one, understanding how to get a driver's license in the US or navigate the US healthcare system. And so tonight we will spend most of our time talking about the immigration responsibilities of your status in that immigration sphere of our work. But we will also talk a little bit about those first steps with resources that are available on our website or different events that we'll be having over the next couple of weeks to help you really navigate both your academic life, but also sort of the gaps of I'm new to this country, what do I do, what's next? And we really look forward to serving all of you. And thank you so much for being here tonight. I will turn it back to Zaina.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leah. I should have also mentioned that if questions come up throughout this presentation, that you all are more than welcome to put them in the chat, and Leah and I will be answering those as they come in. I do ask that it be relevant to the slide that we're on, but we will be staying after if there are any residual questions after we've concluded with the presentation. So we are going to start off with first and foremost the immigration component. It will be understanding your documents. So hopefully at this point, since you all have arrived on campus, you are somewhat familiar with this documentation, but we are just going to go over some of the reminders, things to make sure that you are constantly checking and perhaps checking in with us about if you have questions. So the first document that we are going to go over is your Form I-20 or your DS 2019. If you are an F1 visa holder, then we have issued you a Form I-20, and if you are a J1 visa holder, then we have issued you your DS 2019. So hopefully you've all reviewed this information for accuracy, but if you have not, then please feel free to do so perhaps now or maybe right after this session, so that way if any questions come up that you know to get in touch with the ISSA team. So please make sure, first of all, that your name is spelled correctly. Please make sure that your city of birth is correct. Please make sure that you have reviewed the program of study information, that your major looks correct, though I should mention that if it's not exactly in line with what the Notre Dame major is called, that is probably okay. But if you have specific questions or it looks completely wrong, then please be sure to reach out to us. Make sure that you review your program start and end date. This is very important because especially perhaps not now as you're just now starting your programs, but that end date, if you perhaps need more time to study than what's listed there, you would need an updated document, an updated I-20 or DS 2019 in order to extend your program. So any of this information, if it's not correct or if it needs to be updated, either now or perhaps throughout your Notre Dame program, that's something that you definitely need to get in touch with ISSA about so that we can fix any errors or perhaps make updates as needed. You also should have signatures on your documents. You all should also have printed out and signed your documents. Perhaps for our F1 students, the ISSA team gave you a digital signature on your I-20, but please note that your signature should be hand signed with ink. For our J1 friends, your DS 2019s should have only ink signatures on them. So please make sure that that is the case. All right, so now moving on to the visa stamp. So in your passport, unless you are a Canadian or Bermuda national, you have a visa, either an F1 if you're an F1 student or a J1 if you're J1. It is very important that throughout your program, your Notre Dame program, anytime that you're traveling and re-entering the United States, that you are using this visa stamp, that you are entering in F1 or J1 status every single time. This is particularly relevant for those of you who may have more than one US visa stamp in your passport. If you accidentally present a tourist visa to the consular officer or to the CBP officer at the airport when you're entering the US, there is a really high chance that they would incorrectly enter you as a tourist, which is a problem because you can't study as a tourist. So just please make sure that anytime you're coming into the US that you're presenting the correct visa in your passport. Please also take note of the expiration date of your visa. Because while this visa can expire when you're physically in the United States, after it expires, if you plan to travel outside of the United States, you would need to make plans to get it renewed before being able to return to the US. Anytime you are outside the US trying to come back, you need to have a valid visa. I say it's like a movie ticket. When you're in the US, it's okay if the visa expires, but if you leave and you want to come back, you're going to need to have a valid visa. So please make sure anytime you're traveling, and we will cover this again in our presentation, please make sure that you've checked the validity of the visa stamp. Also, please make note that you can only apply for a new visa outside of the United States, which is okay because, again, the visa can expire while you're still physically in the US and otherwise maintaining your status. And we're going to cover what exactly it means to maintain your status in just a little bit. So the next really important document is the I-94 record. So at this point, hopefully many of you, if not all of you, have already accessed your I-94 record. The I-94 record is essentially a record of your most recent entry into the United States. It is accessed online, but we always recommend that you save a copy, that you print it out and keep a hard copy with you, and at the very least, save it as a PDF on your phone, on your computer, something that shows the most recent I-94 record. The information on the I-94 record, it will look something like this. This admission record number will change every time you re-enter the United States. The most recent date of entry will also update with the date that you entered the United States. If you leave the US and you come back, please make sure that within a few days of returning to the United States, that the information on your I-94 record has been updated. So make sure that the most recent date of entry has been updated, make sure that that admission number has been updated, and then also the class of admission. So the class of admission should always say either F1, if you're an F1 student, or J1, if you're a J1 student. If this says anything else, if this says B2, that means that you were entered incorrectly into the system, and that is something that must be fixed as soon as possible. So it's very important that you check the I-94 record as soon as possible once you arrive back in the US, and make sure that the information looks correct. The other thing that you always want to check for is this admit until date. This should always say for both our F1 and J1 students D/S, which means duration of status, which is what allows you to remain in the United States, even if your visa has expired, in that particular class of admission, either F1 or J1. If there is an actual date listed here, if there is a date listed, that's a problem. That's something that needs to be corrected. So again, at the very least, please be checking the I-94 record every time you re-enter the United States. Make sure that it has been updated correctly, and that it says F1 or J1 and then D/S. All right, so just a few reminders in terms of your documents. So first, please keep track of your documents. You should be checking them fairly regularly, but at the minimum, probably at the beginning of each semester and before you travel. Store them in a safe place. Many times students come in because they put their I-20 or their passport into the washing machine, and it is now irreparably damaged. Please make sure that you're keeping them safely stored. Review them, as I mentioned, before you plan to exit the United States so that you know if anything needs to be done before you go, or if perhaps you're going to need to renew the visa while you're abroad before you're able to come back. At the beginning of each semester, make sure that you're taking a look, and then also make sure that you carry with them when you're traveling, oftentimes even domestically, which we're going to cover in just a second. You're going to need to carry at least some of your immigration documents. So regarding travel, so travel inside versus outside of the United States. So if you're traveling within the United States, we do recommend that you carry at least your passport and your Form I-20 or DS 2019. Your passport, of course, as a document to identify you, and also your Form I-20 or DS 2019, which will show your relationship to the University of Notre Dame as a student here. Your F1 or J1 status is valid throughout the United States. What we mean by that is that if you travel to Wisconsin for the weekend to visit some friends, you are not going to go through customs and immigration on your way back to Indiana. Your F1 status, your J1 status is still valid. You are not exiting the United States when you just travel domestically to another state. But you will need your passport or perhaps a driver's license, if any of you already have that, to board a plane or train, even within the United States. So even though you're not necessarily going to be going through immigration, you should still carry these documents with you, at least your passport or driver's license, as a means of identification, which will be required. For any travel outside of the United States, please make sure this is particularly important. This is why we tell you to check your documents anytime you're planning to travel outside of the US. You will need to make sure that your passport is valid at least 6 months into the future of when you plan to return. This is not ISSA policy. This is actually something that the airlines are required to enforce. So they will check the validity of your passport as you're coming back to the US, and it must be valid at least 6 months into the future. I have seen students be denied entry onto the plane because their passport was not valid 6 months into the future. So please, this is why we tell you check the validity of your documents, make sure that everything looks good before you're planning to travel outside of the United States. As we mentioned before you travel internationally, check the validity of your F1 or your J1 visa to be sure that that also will be valid at the time that you're planning to return to the US. Just keep in mind, anytime you're outside of the US trying to get back in, you must have a valid F1 or J1 visa. And then just do a quick review of your I-20 or your DS 2019 to make sure that everything still looks good, all the information is still up to date. And then you will need to check that there is a valid travel signature on your document. For our F1 students on your I-20, this travel signature will be on page 2. And for our J1 students on your DS 2019, this will be on the bottom right corner of your DS 2019. So please make sure that you get a valid travel signature. It's important to note that the travel signature during your Notre Dame program is valid for 1 year at a time, which means that you don't have to get a new signature every single time that you travel. You just have to make sure that the travel signature that you have was given to you within the last year. So if it's been more than a year, you'll need to come back to get a new one. But if you're traveling twice outside of the US during the summer, then your travel signature, you don't necessarily have to come back to get another travel signature both times. If you have questions about it, feel free to reach out to ISSA. Just a final note regarding travel is that it is Customs and Border Protection who determine your eligibility to enter the US. Another way of saying that is that any travel outside of the United States has inherent risk. So a lot of times students will come in and ask us, do you think I'm going to have a problem? Can you be sure that I'm going to be able to come back to the US? And unfortunately, our answer is that we cannot guarantee that ever. We're not the ones deciding whether or not you get to come back. We can tell you what documents to carry and how to be best prepared when coming into the United States. But please just keep in mind that it is CBP who determines your eligibility to enter the US and may have further questions for you about your documents or your intentions while in the US. So next, moving on to what it means to maintain your F1 or J1 status. At this point, you've heard me say this, and you will likely hear us say it again while you're at Notre Dame. You will need to maintain your status. But what exactly does that mean? So first, we want to make a distinction between establishing your status and then actually maintaining your status. So establishing your status is more to do with the documentation, your Form I-20 or DS 2019, your I-94 record that shows that you entered the US in a particular status, your F1 or your J1 visa, and your CVIS record, which is essentially the immigration record that ISSA manages while you're in the US studying at Notre Dame. So all of these establish you as an F1 or J1 student. But what does it mean to maintain that status while you're in the US? So primarily, the maintenance of status portion is determined by what you're doing here to comply with federal regulation. And what we mean by that means that for your enrollment, you have to be enrolling full time. You will have to have a valid US address on file at all times. You will need to make sure that for any work you're doing, you have appropriate authorization, that you update ISSA with any changes to your program. If anything with the information on your immigration documents has changed, you need to make sure that you contact us to get that updated. And then, of course, making sure that any time that you travel and return to the US, that you're doing so in the appropriate status. So we're going to go a little bit more into detail about each of these different aspects of maintaining your immigration status while you're at Notre Dame. So for enrollment, you must be enrolled full-time each and every spring and fall semester. This is a requirement of your student status in the United States. Full-time enrollment for immigration regulation for graduate and professional students, this is going to be 9 credits each fall and spring semester. For undergraduate students, this is going to be 12 credits each semester. I imagine the majority of you are graduate students, so please keep in mind that you will need to enroll in 9 credits every single fall and spring semester. Summer is not a required term, which means that we are not confirming enrollment in the summer. So you do not have to enroll in the summer if you don't want to or your program doesn't require you to, but at least in the spring and fall semester, we do have to monitor your enrollment, and we will be alerted if you are not maintaining at least that 9 credits, and we will follow up with you. So just a couple of notes that may not be particularly relevant to everyone, but just generally note that only one online class is allowed per semester to count towards that full-time enrollment. So out of those 9 credits, only one of those classes is allowed to be online. And also that there are some exceptions in the final semester of your program to this full-time enrollment requirement. So of course you all are just starting out, so this isn't going to be super relevant to you yet. But in your final semester, if you don't have a full-time course load remaining to complete your program, then there may be an exception available to you to this full-time requirement. If you only have 1 class left to finish your degree and you don't want to take 3 classes, then you will be able to only take that 1 class and still be considered to be maintaining status. If questions come up when that time comes, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Again, I realize that that may not be for a little while for many of you. So roll call ends on the 6th day of class. So during roll call, this is something that you're completing with the registrar's office at Notre Dame every spring and fall semester. This is something where you're confirming essentially your U.S. address. You're confirming that you are enrolled full-time in classes. This is done through Inside ND. Just to note that this is not an ISSA process, although you do have to do this in order for ISSA to register you that you're continuing to maintain status every fall and spring semester. Again, roll call ends on the 6th day of class, which coincides with the add drop period, by which time you have to have all of your schedule sorted out and be sure that you are at that full-time enrollment requirement, that either 9 or 12 credits if you're a graduate or undergraduate respectively. So again, by this time you must be enrolled full-time, and note that the roll call is separate from your course registration and your immigration registration. So we're going to talk at the end of this presentation about the ISSA registration process that you all are required to do in order for us to confirm with the U.S. government that you arrived on campus and you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing. And this is separate from enrolling in classes. So this is actually done through Inside ND. Again, this is due on the 6th day of class of a given semester. All right, so the next part of maintaining your status is keeping your U.S. address up to date. So you are required to notify ISSA of any update to your U.S. address within 10 days of moving. So please keep a note of this, that you can update your U.S. address every semester through roll call. But if for whatever reason you move mid-semester, then you still have to notify us within 10 days. We are required to keep that U.S. address on your SEVIS record, on your immigration record, updated and as accurate as possible. You can confirm with us that your immigration record's been updated with the new address. You can shoot us an email or come visit us in advising, and we're happy to confirm that information for you. But again, please keep that 10-day requirement in mind in case you move during the semester. And at the very least, make sure that you're updating your U.S. address every semester through the roll call process. So another really important part of maintaining your status is complying with employment requirements. So right now we're going to talk about on-campus employment. So for our F1 students, please note that there is no particular authorization required from ISSA in order for you to pursue on-campus employment. When we say on-campus, we mean that this work is taking place on Notre Dame's campus, but that you're also being paid by Notre Dame. And so that's a super important part of that on-campus employment is what exactly it is. So please make sure that if it is on-campus employment, the funding that you're receiving is coming from the university. For our F1 students, again, no specific authorization is required from ISSA in order to pursue this employment, which means that if you want to get a job at the library, you don't need any special permission from ISSA. You may need assistance from us during the process of applying for a Social Security number, but you don't need special authorization. You're eligible from the start date of your I-20 throughout your academic program on campus. You are permitted to work up to 20 hours per week during the fall and spring semester, and you are allowed to work more than 20 hours per week during any sort of designated school break, fall break, spring break, the summer break. Then during those time periods, you're not limited to that 20 20 hours per week. Just a note that if you clock more than 20 hours per week, we will be notified and we will follow up with you to remind you that this is a requirement of your status and that is a violation. If this happens multiple times, we will call you in. It could become a bigger issue. So please make sure that you monitor that for on-campus employment. You're limited to 20 hours per week. For our J1 students, if you are a J1 student, please note that any employment that you pursue, even on campus, requires prior authorization from ISSA. This includes if you're receiving any sort of scholarship, if you've got a fellowship or assistantship through your department, any employment, even on campus or off campus for our J1 students requires authorization from ISSA. Similarly to our F1 students, though, you are limited to 20 hours per week of work during the fall and spring semesters. So please keep that in mind. So for our F1 students, no authorization needed to pursue on-campus employment. For our J1 students, yes, you do need authorization. All right, so now let's talk about off-campus employment. So work that you're doing, perhaps like a summer internship, something that you're doing off of Notre Dame's campus that is being paid by somebody besides the University of Notre Dame. So for our F1 students, you have two primary ways in which you can get work authorization, or two types of work authorization. The first one is optional practical training, or OPT, and the second one is curricular practical training, or CPT. Typically, OPT is going to be reserved for after students have completed their program, whereas CPT is typically for an internship requirement as part of your program, something you're doing that's counting towards your degree requirements. I'm not going to go super in detail about each of these different types of employment. However, I do want to point out that we have a very helpful webpage. And if you do a quick Google search of Notre Dame ISSA CPT or Notre Dame ISSA OPT, it will take you to our CPT and OPT web pages where we go very clearly step by step through what the process and timelines are for each of these processes. But the important thing to note is that you do need authorization for any sort of on-campus employment. We have a particular section as well that talks about unpaid positions and what getting an unpaid or volunteer position might look like. If you have particular questions about a specific position, we're happy to answer any questions. You can come talk to us and we're happy to advise on next steps. But please keep in mind that working without authorization is a severe violation of your status. For our J1 students, again, you need authorization for any employment that you are doing in the United States. Your authorization for any sort of off-campus employment is called academic training. And we do have another page dedicated specifically to academic training on our website. So feel free to review that as well. In order to be eligible, and this is specific to our F1 students, in order to be eligible for this off-campus work authorization, it's important to keep in mind that you must have been enrolled full-time and been maintaining your status for at least an academic year to be eligible, which means when we say academic year, we mean a spring and a fall semester, or a fall and a spring semester. And so if you have not met that academic year requirement, please note that you will not be eligible for CPT or OPT. And if you have particular questions about that, again, it would be best to make an appointment one-on-one with one of the ISSA representatives. And then just a general reminder that you should never work off campus without first obtaining authorization from ISSA, or perhaps if it's sometimes like if it's clearly a volunteer or charity position, you may still want to talk to ISSA first, but you may not necessarily need work authorization. That's something that we would discuss on a case-by-case basis. The important thing is to make sure you're talking to us first. Okay, so there are many times throughout your program when you may need to contact ISSA, and sometimes there will be an academic component, an academic process, and then there will be an immigration process. And you all as F1 and J1 students you're going to have to navigate kind of these two different layers to your Notre Dame experience, both the academic and the immigration. There may be some problems that you encounter that would impact your ability to continue in your program. This would be something like if you have an issue with your health and you need to take something like a medical leave of absence. This would be something that would impact potentially your ability to continue continue in your academic program, but also potentially your ability to remain in the US and maintain your status. Another example, while I'm sure this will not be an issue for all of you, but just in case it is, it's good to know if for any reason you're suspended or dismissed from the university, this would also impact your ability to continue maintaining status in the US. So you would want to talk to ISSA about potential next steps. If you're taking a leave of absence, if you have to go do military service, or you're taking a gap semester and you're gonna go home for a semester before returning, these all have immigration implications as well. So there's no way to pause your immigration status while you're taking a gap semester. You would need to both file for a leave of absence with the university, and then ISSA would need to take action to end your immigration record for the time you're going to be on a leave of absence. If you complete your program early, this would require an update to your immigration documents. If you need a program extension, if you're not going to finish your program in time and you need to extend your program end date, this is something that you would need permission from the academic department, but you would also need to get to talk to ISSA to update your immigration documents. If any of you get married or you have a baby and you want that person to be your dependent in the United States, you would need to talk to ISSA about getting updated documentation for that person. And again, if you have any sort of off-campus or remote work employment opportunity, again, this is something that you would want to talk to us about to make sure that you're getting the appropriate authorization. So there are many times in which you'd have to connect with ISSA throughout your program. These are just some of the primary examples. But of course, if you just kind of need a point of contact and you're not sure who to reach out to, you're more than welcome to connect with us as well. And we're happy to point you in the right direction. Even if it's not something specific immigration related, we're happy to kind of let you know who might be a good person to talk to. So next, risks of losing or violating your F1 or J1 status. So keep in mind that if you violate your status, that this could impact your ability to work or access any sort of work benefits. It may require your immediate departure from the United States, and it also could impact your ability to return to the US in the future, depending on the severity of what the violation was. So please make sure that if you have questions about something that could make you lose or violate your status, or something that you're not sure you're allowed to do, it's always better to be safe than sorry. So please touch base with ISSA first. Okay, so some of the advising resources available to you through ISSA. So when I say that you can get in touch with ISSA, what exactly do I mean? So there are many ways that you'll connect with ISSA throughout your time at Notre Dame. The first one is through ISSA Link. So this is, you can access this through Inside ND. This is essentially how you're going to submit any sort of request to ISSA. If you need an update in your documents, if you need a travel signature, if you're adding a dependent, all of these are going to be done through online forms in ISSA Link. So this is going to be one way that you're connecting with us. If you guys, when you requested your I-20s, most of you requested this through ISSA Link. And so that's going to be one of the primary ways that you're going to be making requests and connecting with our office. We also have advising appointments. So we have walk-in advising on Tuesdays and Wednesdays from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock every week. We also, on many other days throughout the week, and also sometimes on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, offer virtual advising appointments through Zoom, where you can reserve an appointment through our calendar. It's just you and the advisor one-on-one, and usually those are about 15-minute appointment slots where you can ask questions, get clarification, and talk to someone from ISSA. We host a variety of information sessions. We, for example, students graduating this semester are going to start the process of applying for their OPT soon. So we host information sessions about the OPT process. We do this for CPT as well. So there's a variety of information sessions that will be advertised to you through the final component here, which is the ISSA updates. So this is a newsletter, a monthly newsletter from the ISSA office that's going to be giving you really important reminders about potential deadlines that are coming up. Perhaps the ISSA office is going to be closing for a holiday. We want to remind you that we're closing. We're going to tell you about the events that are coming up in the next month. Just lots of really important information highlights. Because so much of this, the ISSA updates email is going to be reminders about your immigration status. Please make sure that you're reading through those emails. We try not to bombard you with emails, but these are really important. At least skim through the highlights and let us know if any questions come up, but please make sure that you're reading those. Okay, so this is just a screenshot of what ISSA Link might look like for you on your end, and kind of all of the things that you may request through an e-form in ISSA Link. So again, if you are requesting an updated I-20 for any reason, if you need to apply for an SSN, you need a particular letter from ISSA. If you're reporting a new US address, there's a form for that as well. Anyway, so this is just to give you an idea of some of the things available to you through ISSA Link, some of the things you might request. If you email in and you actually have to submit an e-form in order for us to help you with your inquiry, then we will direct you to that e-form in ISSA Link. And then again, ISSA Communications, so we'll be sending you that monthly ISSA updates newsletter. This is our social media information that you can follow us on. And then we do also have an events webpage, which is going to be great to kind of help you know what's going on, what might be of interest to you, both within the ISSA office, but we also will post events that may be relevant to our international student and scholar community across the university. So they may be events that we're collaborating with other offices to host, or perhaps just another team at Notre Dame is hosting an event that might be helpful. We'll be putting those on our events webpage as well. And again, the highlight events will also be in our ISSA updates newsletter. So be sure to look for them there as well. So moving on to resources for life in the US. So outside of just the immigration assistance that ISSA provides, we also are here to help you with a bunch of other things that come along with being a visa holding student in the United States. So for example, we provide resources on filing your taxes in the United States and procuring a social security number if you don't have one already. So just a reminder in terms of your tax filing obligations, even as an international student. So international students must file US tax forms to the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, each spring, even if they have no income. So I want to break down what exactly that means. So in the US, taxes are filed in April of a given year for the income earned in the previous year. So everyone in the US will be filing their taxes in April of 2023 based on income that they earned in the year 2022. For you all, since you all are physically present in the United States in 2023, you will have a tax filing obligation in April of 2024. If you entered the United States last year, then you have a tax filing obligation in April of 2023, even if you have no income. So when I say that you have a tax filing obligation, even if you had no income, what this means is that you still have at least one form to file for your US taxes, and that is the form 8843. We have a web page that goes over a bunch of frequently asked questions to help you through that process, but you won't owe any money if you didn't have any income. You will just complete the form and submit it to the IRS. But just keep in mind, we will send you reminders as tax filing season gets closer. We provide resources on how to file your taxes, but please keep in mind that even if you didn't earn income, you may still have to file at least one form with the IRS, even if you don't actually owe any money in taxes. Again, we have an entire webpage dedicated to just tax information. So this information is just here as a reminder, but there will be more information for you available when you need it. Many of you, when you choose to get a job, will have to apply for a social security number. Please keep in mind that an SSN is only available to people who are paid by a US institution, which means that you're not automatically eligible for an SSN just by virtue of being in the United States. You have to have a job that's paying you. The social security number is a tax ID number for those who are earning income in the US. So you have to have a job in order to be eligible. If some of you have a job now, maybe you have an on-campus job, once you've completed your immigration registration process, which we're going to go over at the end of this presentation, after you've waited 14 days, this 14 days is primarily just so that the US government systems can sync up to register that you are here in the US. So after you've waited that 14 days, you would be eligible to actually go to the Social Security Administration with your documents to formally apply for the SSN. Just a reminder that if that is the case, if you all have jobs and you are beginning the process of filing for an SSN, that you need an employment letter from ISSA as part of this process. We have a webpage completely dedicated step by step for what this process of getting a social security number looks like and the documents that you will need to do so. And part of that process is getting your offer letter, which we provide a template for what that offer letter needs to look like. And then using that to submit a form in ISSA link to request the ISSA employment verification letter. So that is just part of the process. Please don't forget that component. A lot of students go to the Social Security Administration and then get turned away because they didn't have the appropriate documentation. So please review that webpage information before kind of starting this process to make sure that you have everything ready to go before you go to the Social Security office. Many of you will need to open a bank account now that you are in the US and on campus. Please keep in mind that you will need a government ID, so like your passport, but that you do not need an SSN in order to open a bank account. So if you don't have a job and you're not eligible for an SSN at this time, that is not going to be required for you to open a bank account. However, just a side note that would be required for you to get like a credit card. So you can open an account without an SSN. In order to go to the bank and apply and open an account, you will need some documentation to do this. This is including, but not limited to, your, it is including and hopefully limited to your passport, your immigration document, so your Form I-20 or your DS 2019, a copy of the most recent I-94 record. I know all of you know what these documents are because we just talked about them. Proof of your US residential address. So maybe like your lease, or if you have like a utility bill, like an electric bill or something, just confirming that it's you who lives at this particular US residence, as well as your Notre Dame enrollment verification. The Notre Dame enrollment verification is something you can actually access yourself. This is going to be through Inside ND, and you can print this off and bring that with you in order to open the account. Leah is putting the links to all this information in the chat. All of this information is actually available under our Life in the US section of our website. So this is not something you have to memorize right now. This is just kind of the highlights, things to keep in mind. All of this information is also available on our webpage. So now moving on to human resources and the process for getting on Notre Dame's payroll. So the first thing to keep in mind is that you have to complete your F1 or J1 registration. Again, I know I said this 3 times already, but we're going to do that if you haven't already at the end of this presentation. So the first thing is a really big reminder that you should complete the registration as soon as possible. So if you haven't already done it, then do it with us at the end of the presentation, because if you don't do it in a timely manner, then it's going to delay your ability to complete HR's paperwork, particularly if you have a job on campus. And there are timelines for you to complete these, deadlines for you to complete them. So it's super important that you get everything done as soon as possible. It may delay your ability to get paid in the first pay cycle, which would delay your paycheck, which of course we don't want that to happen. And it may also delay your ability to apply for an SSN. The tax office will be sending you emails if you have not provided an SSN, because they need to provide you with tax documents for any income that you've earned. So please keep in mind that you should complete this registration form as soon as possible to avoid any of these delays. And then moving on to human resources, payroll, and taxes. So just know that the I-9 process is a process that is completely managed within Notre Dame's HR. This is not an ISSA process. Essentially, I-9 is just the process of determining that you're eligible to work in the US. And HR is the one who is going to review your documents and work with you to complete that process. You may also, if you have an on-campus job, have received emails about completing this. But please note that is entirely managed within human resources. The W-4 tax withholding process, you can access your W-4 document through Inside ND. W-4, again, is a tax document. So just a note about direct deposit. So direct deposit is how you're going to set up how you get paid from the university. Again, this is something that you can access through payroll and Inside ND. Your F1 registration, again, F1 and J1 registration, this is going to be required for you to complete a lot of these processes. So please make sure that you're doing that in a timely manner. Some of you may have already completed that process, which is great. The SSN application, we advise students to apply for an SSN as soon as you're eligible. So if you have an on-campus job and you've completed your registration, then we would recommend that you go ahead and start getting the documents together so that as soon as you've waited that 14 days, you can go ahead and go right to the Social Security Administration to get that process started. It's important to note that for the SSN process, when you go and apply in person, which by the way, you do have to apply in person at the office in downtown South Bend, that you get kind of a receipt to confirm that you applied, but the actual card is going to be mailed to you sometimes several weeks later. And so this isn't all happening in one transaction. You're going to apply for the SSN, and then they once they issue the card, they're going to mail it to your US address within a few weeks. So just keep that in mind. Make sure that you are touching base with student employment. They are kind of your one-stop shop for anything related to student jobs on campus. And then they will also work with you to review your new employee student guide. That will be part of the onboarding process once you start your job on campus. This is kind of just a reminder that there are other offices on campus who may be working with you and advising you on these separate processes. It's not all maintained within ISSA. Please make sure, and hopefully all of you have done this at this point, that you've paid the I-901 CVIS fee. Many of you probably paid this before you went to your visa appointment, and you all should have gotten the CVIS fee receipt or the I-901 fee receipt. Please make sure that you keep that on your person, or not on your person, but in a safe place with all the rest of your important immigration documents. You should carry a copy of this receipt anytime that you're traveling, outside of the United States. It's a really important document. If you've lost it, there is a place where you can go to reprint it, so it's not the end of the world. But please keep in mind that if you have not yet paid this fee, ISSA will not be able to register you, which again will cause delays in the rest of the processes here. So again, please make sure you have that receipt, keep it with you in a safe place. Okay. So now moving on to, I know we talked about banking a little bit before, but we're going to get a little bit more in depth about banking and cash and kind of things to know while you're on campus. So again, opening a bank account, you'll need a government ID, but the social security number is not going to be required. But I did add the caveat that an SSN will be required to open a credit card. So please keep that in mind. You will need the listed documents that we're showing you here. Again, this information is on our Life in the US page, so you don't have to memorize it right now or take a picture. It's all on the website. Just a note that campus is now cashless, which means that you will have to make any purchase on campus with a card, be that a credit or debit card, be that through the Grubhub app, which is linked to any of the kiosks where you can order food on campus, or with your Irish One card or your Notre Dame ID card. But there won't be any cash transactions accepted on campus. So please, if you weren't aware of that, please keep that in mind. The on-campus banking is done through First Source Bank, so that may be a good first stop for you to open a bank account. Of course, you are welcome to open an account with other banks like Chase, the Notre Dame Credit Union, Old National Bank. First Source Bank is great for the Notre Dame area, but if you are interested in maybe opening an account with a bank that has branches all across the US, then a bigger bank like Chase may be more appropriate. All right, so resources in terms of safety. So anytime there's any sort of major emergency, like a fire, medical emergency, weapons or suspicious activity on campus, 911 should be your first call. So make sure that when you're speaking, if there is such a situation, that you're speaking slowly and as clearly as possible. They may ask you to provide what exactly the emergency is, to explain it, to tell them where you are, what sort of specific help you might might need. So please just make sure that if you're contacting the police, that you're being as cooperative and providing them with the any information that you can. However, if there is a kind of perhaps less severe emergency, please note that Notre Dame does have their own police department, which is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And that if it's kind of a less severe emergency, if you've been locked out of your car, that there is also a non-emergency line where you can contact the NDPD. So if it's a severe emergency, 911 always your go-to. If it's less severe, please make note of the NDPD non-emergency line. They also have their own webpage with information on how to contact them. So if that's ever a concern, you can always look on there as well. I also think that the number for the NDPD is going to be on your student ID cards, on the back of your student ID cards. So that may be good to know as well. Another issue in terms of safety, and unfortunately our international students are particularly vulnerable to these sorts of situations, is things like scams, either via email or perhaps over the phone. So this is just kind of a general reminder that you shouldn't be paying anyone over the phone to help with immigration or tax problems. Sometimes we've had students report that somebody called them and told them that their visa was expiring, or they didn't pay their taxes properly and that they're going to be deported. And of course, these are all very triggering situations. Deported is a very triggering word, which of course we understand, but just a reminder that the US government is not going to call you to tell you that they're going to deport you. So please make sure that if there's any sort of suspicious activity like this, that you're not paying anyone over the phone. If you have questions, you can hang up, you can come talk to us if you're worried about whether or not it was really a scam. But unfortunately, we've had students put in some scary situations and also who have lost a lot of money because of these situations. They may have information about you that sounds really convincing, but please make sure that if you're worried about it, that you talk to ISSA first. Again, the US government's not going to call you to threaten you over the phone. If someone's threatening you or your status, your immigration status, again, tell them that you need to speak first with an ISSA advisor and come talk to us, and we can let you know what the best next steps are, and let you know, sometimes if you receive something in the mail, I've had students come in to just ask, I'm not sure if this is a scam. Can you look it over and tell me what you think? And that's perfectly fine. We're happy to review any of that sort of documentation before you take any action. So again, just please be careful when it comes to those types of scams. So now moving on to healthcare. So just a note about some of the services available to you on campus in terms of healthcare. So within St. Liam Hall, which is really close to main building on campus, you have University Health Services, UHS, the University Counseling Center, and the McDonald Center for Student Wellbeing. University Health Services are like if you're sick and you need somebody, you need to meet with a doctor. For University Counseling Center, this is going to be more like mental health services if you need to talk to somebody. They're a great resource, and they also have like walk-in hours, which has been really useful for students. The McDonald Center for Student Wellbeing is actually, it's super cool. Actually, I was in there when I first came to Notre Dame. They have really great rooms that are very relaxing that you can rent out for study, for relaxation. They do things like they will rent out sun lamps, which I didn't know was a thing, but because there's a lot of gray, cloudy weather in South Bend, you can rent out a sun lamp, just cool things like that. So it's always good to know what resources are available to you. A few notes about healthcare in the United States that we think are going to be particularly helpful to UL as international students. So just kind of make sure that when it comes to some sort of healthcare emergency, that you are getting the care that you need, first of all, but also understanding that there are different costs associated with different levels of care in the US. The emergency room, for example, is going to be incredibly costly. So if it's not something that is like a severe life or death situation, then the emergency room may not actually be the best place to go. Something like an urgent care, which some of them are open 24/7, they're usually going to be a little bit less pricey versus something like a regular visit, like you need a vaccine, or you need to kind of have an annual exam with a doctor. Something like that with a primary care physician is going to be much less expensive. So we just want to make you aware that sometimes something like the emergency room, which may be perhaps what you're used to, is just going to the emergency room when you're sick. In the US, that's actually going to cost you a lot of money, and may not be the best solution to whatever your health care situation is. Keep in mind that medical bills may arrive later than when you receive the service. So you may receive a service one day and then maybe a month later receive the bill in the mail. And keep in mind that different companies are going to charge you for different actions. So perhaps the blood tests that you got will be charged differently from the x-rays that you got or from your visit from the doctor. So for all of these services, you may not get one bill, you may get 3 separate bills sent to you for these medical services. There's such a thing called in-network versus out-of-network. A lot of that has to do with your student health insurance, or whatever your health insurance is, and who accepts it. So if you're in South Bend, Indiana, then you're probably going to be in network, versus if you get sick and you need to go see somebody in New York City, then you're probably going to be out of network. If the person that you're seeing either, if it depends on the health insurance. So you want to kind of explore that before you go see some sort of medical professional if you're outside of the Notre Dame or South Bend area. So just something to keep in mind. Also, deductibles and co-pays. Deductible is like a certain amount of money that you pay in a given year towards your health care, and that will impact how much money you pay for other services. It's very convoluted. A lot of what we're trying to say here is that you should really do your research before, just to make sure that you fully understand the financial burden of what you're taking on when it comes to your health. And also co-pays. Co-pays are usually something that you're going to pay upfront for a doctor's visit. And again, that's how much you pay upfront is determined by the health insurance. So that's something to review your health insurance information, just to confirm that you're kind of what to expect to pay for visits to the doctor. Interestingly, in the United States, medical insurance does not usually include dental or vision care, and these are separate. So particularly if you are not enrolled in the university's health insurance, please make sure that you are aware that usually dental and vision are separate. I don't quite understand that one, but unfortunately that is the case in the United States. You may also need what's called a referral from your primary care physician in order to see a specialist or to do something like physical therapy. What that means is that you'll often have to visit with your primary care first, and then they will have to refer you your information to something like perhaps a dermatologist or a physical therapist for a specific area of medical expertise. So that's also something to review when you're reviewing your healthcare or your health insurance information. So now moving on to community resources. Again, all of this information is also going to be available on the ISSA Life in the US webpage. We give you information on the webpage about how to get a US driver's license, but there is also a bus system in South Bend, so you can access the information about the bus routes through their webpage. If you're looking for resources like places of worship, if you're looking for a church to join in the area, you can find more information about this through Notre Dame resources. There are the South Bend Public Libraries if you wanted to access one of the public libraries. If you need some sort of tutoring or perhaps English language support, we have a great resource in the Center for the Studies of Languages and Cultures, also known as the CSLC. They provide kind of, like academic writing support, English conversation tables. They have some great resources there. Also cultural clubs. We have many student clubs on campus who host a variety of events. And a lot of times we'll advertise those events on our webpage, but you can also get more information about the different cultural clubs available for you to join through the Student Activities Office on campus. Okay, So here are some community recommendations. I will leave it up for a second if you'd like to take a picture of it, because this information is actually not on the webpage, but just some recommendations from some of our students and from the ISSA team of different places that we enjoy going to for coffee or for shopping or for some food. So my personal recommendations for coffee would be cloud walking is my favorite. And actually, I also love to hike. So I go to Potato Creek State Park all the time. So if I had to recommend two things to you from this list, it would be those two. All right. We will go ahead and move right along. So this is just a reminder that ISSA is here to help you, but it is primarily your responsibility to manage your status and to get any questions that you have answered, to get documents updated. This is really your responsibility, and we're here to help you along the way. We do report to government agencies, but we also like to confirm that we do not work for the government. We work for the university, and so our primary responsibility is to assist our students. So please, if questions do come up, please feel free to reach out. Again, we don't work for the government, we work for the university. If you have any questions about your status, please keep in mind that ISSA is the only department on campus that should advise you or your dependents about your visa status and immigration regulations. You may have an advisor who has worked with a lot of international students and may be able to provide some information, but we really would recommend that you not rely on that information and that you come to ISSA because a lot of times it's kind of like the snowball effect is what we say. It's like one question might actually lead to 3 more questions. And sometimes your advisor may not be able to address that, whereas we at ISSA will be able to give you kind of the whole story, the big picture. And so really important that ISSA is the only place you're going to. Similarly, we have a lot of students who come in and say, oh, well, my friend told me this. And that's great. We love friends, but not when it comes to managing our immigration status. So please make sure that you're always consulting with ISSA. Also, some things may change between you and your friend, depending on where you're from, what your program is, where you're at in your program. So anyway, just be sure to touch base with us for any questions that come up. That being said, as I mentioned several times throughout this presentation, we are going to move along to the student registration portion. So I'm going to leave this up for any of our J1 students. If you are a J1 student and you have not yet completed your student registration with ISSA, this is done through ISSA Link. It's an online form. Then please go ahead and scan this QR code to complete that process now. You will have to log in with your Notre Dame credentials. If you're an F1 student, just hold on. We're going to get, to yours in just one moment. This is only for J1 students. Please go ahead, scan the code, and it'll be taken to the ISSA Link e-form, where you're going to have to upload a copy of your most recent I-94 record from when you just entered the United States, and go ahead and complete that form and submit it. I will leave it up here for 3 more seconds, and then we're going to go to the F1, and I'll come back as needed. If you need it, again, please let me know in the chat. All right, so our F1 student registration, again, if you are an F1 student and you have not yet completed the ISSA Link registration, please go ahead and scan the QR code to complete that now. We can also take questions during this time in the chat, or it looks like we don't have that many people. If it's easier for you to unmute yourself and ask your question, that's fine as well. But while we're waiting for everyone to complete that registration, we can also take any pending questions that didn't get answered throughout this presentation. And if we need to go back to the J1 registration, if any of you didn't get a chance to scan the QR code, just go ahead and put it in the chat. I'm happy to go back to that one as needed.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm in the page, but should I click on the new student registration?